class is in session. This is the final pre-draft episode of the 2022 draft seminar. I'm your host, Matt Hicks, the FF Educator, and I am joined as always by John Lobb, the Gridiron Scholar. We are here to break down our wide receiver and tight end consensus rankings. You're going to have to head back an episode if you want to check out those quarterback and running back consensus rankings. John, let's go ahead and jump right into it here. Folks, I'm sorry, we're starting with the tight ends. And listen, I know it's not the best tight end class, but there are a few guys that I'm excited to talk about here. So, John, let's start with our consensus 10 through 6. I feel like that's a good tier point here, and then we'll go from there. Number 10 is Cole Turner, the tight end out of Nevada. I got to tell you, John, pretty disappointing. About 6 months ago, Cole Turner was a different story, but he's really fallen off in the pre-draft process. Speaking of, Jalen Wydermyer is coming in at number 9 in our consensus rankings out of Texas A&M. Grant Calcaterra out of SMU, number 8. Jelani Woods, a recent riser, number 7. Out of Virginia, and Isaiah Likely, Coastal Carolina, another tight end, John, that's fallen over the last few months. Certainly a lot to dig into here with this tier. Where do you want to start?
I wanted to start with how we kind of address tight ends over a period of time as a dynasty fantasy asset. You mentioned Isaiah Likely falling, Cole Turner falling. Well, as a college football fan and college fantasy football fan, we liked them because they were extraordinarily good at pass catching. They posted incredible numbers as receivers, but they were both group of 5 players. So, Matt, when you look at the early production model, both players pop. However, through the process, we get official weights and official heights, and Cole Turner is a little undersized at 246. He's 6'6". So what do we have? A tall, lean frame. Probably not the big butt to stand at the line of scrimmage and block a 290-pound defensive end or a 280-pound defensive pass rusher, an edge rusher. So that's a problem there. Then Isaiah Likely comes in 6'4". So he's okay. 6'4" is nice, but it's not unbelievable. But he comes in at 245. And then he goes to the combine and his times aren't as good. So what you end up seeing over a period of time, because they're a group of 5 prospects with less than impressive size and athletic ability, they begin to fall down the process. And even when I watched them at Nevada and Coastal Carolina, I never thought they were 3 down inline tight ends. But you kind of hoped that with their size that they could be position blockers, right? That they would, but then they fall undersized. So part of being a position blocker is you need to have a requisite size and determination, and we don't get that. Then I'm going to talk about who I believe is the biggest riser, and it's been a conundrum. Jelani Woods.
Yeah.
He came from Oklahoma State. He was a dual threat quarterback, Matt.
Quarterback, yeah, 6'7".
Yeah. So then he goes to Oklahoma State. He plays well, but not great. But I will say this about him. Oklahoma State doesn't throw to the tight ends. So
John, name one Oklahoma State tight end. Name
none.
one.
I've watched for 20 years. I don't think I know one. So he kind of made a good decision to transfer to Virginia. And while I love Brennan Armstrong, so I was watching a lot of Virginia, they were a fun offense. There were moments when Jelani Woods popped off the screen. He was absolutely incredible. But then he goes to the combine, Matt. He's an incredible athlete. He's not a good athlete. He's an incredible athlete. 4.61 in the 40, 4.22 in the 20-yard shuttle, 6.91 in the 3-cone drill. He kills my benchmark stats like Andy 6'7", 253. He's inconsistent on film. I do think he has a lot to learn. But, Matt, he can attack the seam of a defense. And I've said this before, and I'll say here, he's a no-brainer in a dynasty if you're looking for the home run. The ceiling is massive with Jelani Woods, Matt. But let's be fair. His floor is very low. That's why I look at the entire outcome and he ends up number 7 in our rankings because you have to embrace risk. Now, I've seen some people, Matt, put him, they're like number 2 on their list. I'm not that bullish because the risk, I watched too much film. I can't go all in. Do I like him in the 3rd? Or I love him in the 4th, like him in the 3rd of a dynasty if I'm desperate. But I have to understand he could be like Jay Sternberger. Remember Jay Sternberger coming out of Texas A&M, right? Gone. Like, that's what you're looking at with Isaiah Likely. What do you think of these 5, Matt?
Well, John, there's 3 tight ends out of our top 10 here that we significantly differ on. The other ones, I actually don't think that we have any consensus rankings, but we're close. We're close on a lot of them. The one in this group is Grant Calcaterra, and I'm excited about Grant Calcaterra. I understand why you have him lower here. So Calcaterra ended up our consensus tight end 8, but John has him ranked at 11. I have him ranked at tight end 4. And I understand here, John, where I'm assuming you're coming from, which is we're probably projecting some late day 3 draft capital. I think best case scenario, early day 3, because there's some legitimate medical red flags. Grant Calcaterra.
The film is great, Matt.
The film's great.
On the medical.
The size is great. The hands, athleticism, that is what we want from our fantasy football tight ends. Now, Grant Calcaterra, a 4-star recruit, broke out early as a freshman at Oklahoma in a really good offense, as a featured weapon. You watch him play at SMU, he almost, looks more like an oversized wide receiver than he necessarily does a tight end. Here's the issue. Grant Calcaterra has medically retired from football in the past. And because of concussions, and no knock on him, that's a serious issue. He took it seriously, and he was cleared to come back and play. So Grant Calcaterra might only be on 10 out of 30 NFL draft team boards, depending on those medical checks. I don't know that. Maybe he's on all 32 boards, right? I'm not sure. And so for me, let's let the NFL tell us how they feel about Grant Calcaterra. But, outside of the medicals, he could be a really high-end fantasy football prospect, and he gets me excited. There's only, John, really 3 guys, or I should say, 3 guys in addition to Grant Calcaterra that get me excited, very excited. These other guys interest me. I'm always interested, but 3 guys are really at the top for us. And before we get to those guys, I'm going to create like a mini tier for us with our 4 and our 5. Number 5 is Charlie Kohler out of Iowa State, and then it's Cade Otton out of the University of Washington. And John, these are the aforementioned 2 other players that we have significantly different rankings on. You have Charlie Kohler much higher than me, so let's go ahead and chat about it.
Charlie Kohler, in my production model, not necessarily athleticism, and I put the 2 of them together. I basically have a 3-pronged process: production, athleticism, and film study. In my production model, Matt, 168 receptions, 65% catch rate, 22% aerial dominator for a tight end is very good. I plugged him in athletically, Matt. I was shocked at how athletic. Because I have to say, when I watch Iowa State, and I watched a ton of them with Breece Hall and Charlie Kohler. I used to study Brock Purdy, but he's no longer in the conversation now. But Charlie Kohler, 4'6'7", 4'3'5", and 6'9'8". Matt, he's almost as good of an athlete as Jelani Woods. I mean, he's not. He's 6'6", 252, but Matt, he's not that far removed from Jelani Woods. So he has production and athleticism. When I don't love the tape. He looks slow. But is that Iowa State, the offense, the routes he ran, what he was asked to do? To me, Kohler, I think he's a sneaky round 3 tight end. If he gets that draft capital, then it's warranted. Now, if he goes round 5, Matt, I'm done. Like, At that level, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. But when I plug him in, he hits everything I'm looking for in a tight end. But I don't like the film. That's the only thing keeping him from. I mean, you watch Iowa State film with Charlie Kolar, you're like, yeah, it's all right. Like, nothing pops.
Yeah, for me, Charlie Kolar is just in this tier of guys, right? It's like, they're all, for me, in what I would call my bench depth tier right now. Pretty much, by the way, tight ends 2 through 10 fall in this range for me. But, really specifically, Charlie Kolar is kind of in this 5 to 10 range where these guys are almost indistinguishable, right? You look at Charlie Kolar, good production, what you want from a fantasy football tight end, pass catching ability. I'm not sure that he's going to translate as a quick blocker to the NFL, so that might limit the packages that he gets out on the field with. And quite frankly, John, if you can catch passes from Brock Purdy, you could catch passes from anybody. And so, certainly any NFL quarterback. So Charlie Kolar has that going for him as well. So it really is a matter of draft capital. I haven't heard that the NFL is as high on him.
No.
But that doesn't mean they're not. It only takes one team, and so it'll be certainly somebody, maybe not the fanciest name out there, but certainly somebody that I'll be keen to learn their landing spot on day 3. I'm assuming day 3 of the NFL draft. But John, Cade Otton, for me, it's almost the reverse of that situation. So Cade Otton going into the pre-draft process for me is tight end number 2. He's tight end number 7 for you. I understand why he's 7 for you. He has limited tape, but what he's put on that UW tape has been good. He's got good pass catching ability. He's got good athleticism. In that second ranking for me is putting a lot of faith in my perception that the NFL has of Cade Otton. I'm hearing that the NFL is bullish on Cade Otton, that they like his athletic ability and his pass catching ability. So for Cade Otton to be our consensus tight end 4 and my tight end 2, that's really leaning into the draft capital that I expect him to get and that athletic ability. Misused at Washington, a train wreck of an offense, but a high prospect, high recruit coming out, and it sounds like that's translated over to the NFL level. John, our top 3 tight ends here, I think this is really the tier of guys that I have settled in. I know I mentioned I like Cade Otton, but I think these are the 3 tight ends that I feel comfortable, aggressively putting out there, especially at the ADP that I see them registering. We could have some really good values. We start here with our consensus tight end 3, Jeremy Ruckert, and then our consensus tight end 2 is Greg Dulcich out of UCLA, Jeremy Ruckert out of Ohio State, and Trey McBride out of Colorado State. John, I think most folks have secured Trey McBride as the tight end 1 in this draft class, at least pre-draft, but there's a lot to like specifically for fantasy football with Jeremy Ruckert and Greg Dulcich as well. Which one of these guys would you rather talk on? And I'll go ahead and take cleanup duty on the other.
All right, then I'm going to do I love Greg Dulcich.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
In fantasy football, we are looking for upside pass catchers. Greg Dulcich was a walk-on at UCLA. He played wide receiver in high school. He gained some weight. He is bigger than I thought. He's 243. Would I love him to be 253? Yes. I would but 243 is okay. At 6'4", he holds the weight pretty well. And he's an underrated blocker. He's not Trey McBride. He's not going to get in your grill. But he's a position blocker with a lot of effort. So that is okay for me. It might get him on the field earlier. But 17.6 yards per reception, Matt, that's tremendous for a tight end. We're looking for big plays from tight end. And I did not expect his combine, Matt. 4.7, 4.37, and 7.05. Greg Dulcich, Charlie Kolar, and Jelani Woods are all uber athletes who exceed my 3 benchmarks at the combine. They're very talented athletically. My film grade, the highest film grade is on the Bruins tight end. I thought he was the most complete route runner and the most consistent. Jelani Woods has the big play, and he'll wow you on film, but he also disappears, right, in my book. Charlie Kolar, I can't describe. I don't love the film, but the numbers are there. I'm not sure how. And he has production. But when I look at the whole model, Greg Dulcich is the package as a receiver. That's why I like him so much.
Yeah, John, I was pretending to be polite. I knew you would bite on an opportunity to talk about Greg Dulcich, and I really wanted to talk about Jeremy Ruckert. Ruckert is somebody who, I say this currently in our consensus ranking, or in my half of our consensus rankings, he's sitting there on the rookie big board right now as tight end 5. And, one of the things I've really trained myself to do is not move players based off feeling. But be able to anticipate that. So although Jeremy Ruckert is sitting at 5, which is where I think his proper value is right now, I can anticipate here that Jeremy Ruckert could end up being as high as tight end 2 for me post-draft. I think that Jeremy Ruckert has a shot to be the first tight end off the board in the NFL draft. I know that's a little bullish to say. It's a little bold of a take, but he's a great two-way blocker. Or two-way tight end, I should say. He's a great blocker. An NFL team is going to want him on the field right away. And although I lead with his blocking ability, he has pass-catching ability. And in a variety of different ways. I think he's a solid route runner for what he was asked to do at Ohio State. I think he has great hands, really consistent hands. And he has great body positioning, John. He understands how to use his big body. I can see Jeremy Ruckert. I can put myself in the brain of an NFL head coach and just visualize, manifest these touchdowns coming to Jeremy Ruckert as this big red zone target, right? I wouldn't be shocked. You see the Jets sitting up there with extra picks at the top of the second. I wouldn't be shocked if Jeremy Ruckert is off the board earlier than we expect. So although, he's down at as our consensus tight end 3 right now, in a few days, John, I might be singing his praises as the best value hanging around in fantasy drafts.
And Matt, I want to say one thing, because I've been interested in Ruckert too. I do agree the NFL will like him more than the fantasy football universe.
Yeah.
And why are you going to throw the ball to Jeremy Ruckert when you have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith and Jigbo?
Yes.
I will say there is a reason why the production model doesn't like Jeremy Ruckert. I agree with that. I'm not throwing the ball to him with those receivers on the field.
Absolutely. And John, I mean, it's no surprise. I'll let you, espouse here your thoughts on Trey McBride here, but we certainly have an athletic, pass-catching, ultra-productive tight end here from Colorado State.
Yeah, I thought this was in all the film grades and all of the positions, I think Trey McBride is the number 1 tight end was the easiest to come true. There were debates about Priest Hall, and we didn't know for sure until the combine. You and I you have Walker, I have Hall, and that's fair. I think there's a lot of people with Walker out there, but I don't see anyone who disagrees with Trey McBride at the top of the board. Isn't he right now second round ADP? If you want a tight end, you're going to have to pay up a little bit for Trey McBride. Love the film. He was phenomenal at Colorado State. Underrated athlete. Matt, I'm all in. If you need a tight end, he is worth that second round draft pick. I don't think he'll be available at 2.8. I think you're going to have to go pretty early, the first half of the second round. That's what I see with Trey McBride. But to me, he's clearly the number 1 tight end on the board.
Yeah, John, and I'll just kind of tie up this tight end, the overall talent of the class here. There are guys I think that are going to be fantasy football relevant, right? At different point values. But just to put in a little bit of context here, especially as you're thinking, is that second round pick fit what Trey McBride is going to bring my team? Trey McBride for me is a few notches lower of a prospect as Pat Freiermuth from last year, right? So Pat Freiermuth returned really good value as a mid-second round pick. And so I'm putting Trey McBride just a little bit below that in terms of projection. And Pat Freiermuth got a landing spot that we liked.
That's the key, right?
Right. And so that's kind of the context you have to put it in. But I would, when thinking of value across last year's class, that's the kind of comparison I would be making at the top of this year's class. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our wide receivers, John. Quite frankly, I struggle with wide receivers because there is easily, 30 wide receivers deep that get me excited in this year's draft class. So to only list 20, I'm sure folks are going to let us know that a wide receiver that they like was left off of the list, right? But let's go ahead and start with Bo Melton, our number 20 consensus wide receiver out of Rutgers. And then Danny Gray out of SMU is 19. Calvin Austin III out of Memphis is 18. 17 is Kevin Austin out of Notre Dame. And 16, John, is Velus Jones out of Tennessee. Where do you want to start here with this group of cheaper but still valuable prospects?
First, Matt, you described it. If you go to Football Diehards, I have 41 wide receivers ranked. Matt, on your rookie big board, I'm sure you must have nearly 50 ranked. So if anyone wants,
I think it's closer to 70, but I think 50 film abouts.
There you go. So either go to Matt's Patreon page or go to Football Diehards, and you can find your favorite guy. Matt definitely has them. I might have them. And the reason I stop at 40, and I usually stop around 40, about 27 to 30 receivers are drafted every year in the NFL draft. And I know there are undrafted free agents, but it's much harder at the wide receiver position as a UDFA than at running back. We have Adam Thielen, and are there really any other UDFAs at the wide receiver spot? We do have Austin Eckler. We do have Robinson at Jacksonville. There are UDFA running backs, but we don't have a lot at wide receiver. So that's why I go to 40. Matt goes deeper for you. But please go to any one of our sites and you can get deeper. My guy that I think I'm going to acquire a lot of is Bo Melton. And it's because of the ceiling. The production model is good, not great. I understand he played for 5 years, I think, at Rutgers. Definitely 4, but I think he had a redshirt season. 164 receptions. I love that, Matt. 28% aerial dominator. I'm impressed. 58% catch rate. 12.3 yards per catch. But Matt, he played at Rutgers. Let me repeat that. He played at Rutgers. Rutgers is in the UConn bucket of offensive production. They're bad. They're bad.
Man. Oh, man.
So when you put it into context, his production model isn't so bad, and his athleticism is there. His 40, the 20-yard shuttle, the 3-cone drill, Matt, incredibly impressive. 5'11", 191. I'm going to have a lot of Bo Melton if he's around in the 3rd round. The ceiling. I'm drafting Bo Melton based on ceiling. I think you're going to hit a home run, or he might not be in the league in 3 years, but I'll take that risk. One play that we did a breakdown on Calvin Austin, and it's interesting, Matt, since we did that video, Calvin Austin is getting some play. And I've heard other people say this, and I did not hear this until the last 2 weeks. And this is what happens late in the process. But I said on the video, Calvin Austin's a better prospect than Tutu Atwell in my
opinion. Yeah.
And Tutu Atwell won the 2nd round. I don't think Austin goes in the 2nd round because I don't know if a team is in love with him. Everyone loved Tutu Atwell last year, right? And you and I were a little low because I said that size is a concern. And I have concerns with Calvin Austin. But if he's in the 3rd or 4th round, I'll take the shot. I think he's a better route runner than Tutu Atwell, and he's a special teams player from day one. And the last one I'll quickly talk about. You and I have talked about Velus Jones a lot. I'm interested because he's going to be a special team contributor from day one. NFL size, I get it. If you're early breakout, you're not interested in Velus Jones. I completely understand. But I think there's upside there. He might need some time, but I'll take him in the 4th or 5th round.
Yeah, John, I think you did a really good job touching on these guys. Briefly here, I'm a big fan of Danny Gray. I think I have him a considerable amount of spots higher than you. Somebody who I'm hearing the NFL is high on. He had a good combine in Indianapolis. He is a great field stretcher, good acceleration. I really liked his contested catch ability. I thought he played really well along the boundary. And you referenced it. I think Danny Gray is going to be a kick returner early on in his NFL career, right? So whether you like Danny Gray, whether you like Calvin Austin, whether you like Velus Jones Jr., if these guys are going to be special teamers, we talk about this point a lot, especially at the wide receiver position. If they're going to contribute to special teams, they have a much, much, much better chance of hanging around the roster here, especially if they're day 3 selections or UDFA selections, right? I think everybody we're going to talk about here for wide receivers will get drafted, but kind of a note to extend past the guys that we're talking about on today's episode as well. I also really like Kevin Austin. Kevin Austin out of Notre Dame, another player who's quick off the line of scrimmage, really well along the boundary, accelerates well, good downfield speed, really sticky hands. I would not be shocked to see Kevin Austin taken at the top of day 3. I think the NFL is high on him. All right. It's funny, John, I swear our tiers end up having like a personality traits here in common or characteristics in common. So let's go ahead and jump into our 15 through 11. Wan'Dale Robinson out of Kentucky, the former Devi Darling, has kind of simmered in terms of his value. And then we have 14, Khalil Shakir, Boise State, who, in contrast, I have on almost all my Devi rosters, and it seems like he's gaining value. So I'm really happy about Khalil Shakir. Jalen Tolbert out of South Alabama is our consensus 13. Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati is our consensus 12. And David Bell, speaking of former Devi Darlings, out of Purdue is our consensus 11. So a lot of different directions to go in here. Where do you want to start?
First, I just want to give a tier to David Bell. The fall has been unfortunate. I was in love with David Bell as a Devi asset. I will say this now, though, Matt. He may become a value. If he's available late in the second round, and I'm talking about 210, 211, it is going to be very difficult for me to bypass him. The production model is off the charts. The early breakout age is tremendous. He was immediately good as a freshman. The only concern is he doesn't have high-level athleticism, and that's why he is dropped in my model. But, Matt, he might just be a good football player. And sometimes we have to assess that. He does fall in my rankings because I have to consider the athleticism. However, I'll scoop him up in the top of the 3rd round all day if he falls, and I will heavily consider him once I hit that 2.9. I do think the upside is there. I just think his chances of hitting what my perceived ceiling was about a year ago has dropped, right? I had such hope, and I still love the film. He has great hands, Matt. He's a really good receiver. Just my concern is that high-level NFL athleticism. And you touched on him. I'm a big fan of Khalil Shakir. I've gotten him in so many mock drafts. I will acquire him in my dynasty drafts. Again, I think he's a very good football player. 6 foot, 196. He's underrated toughness. He's not George Pickens tough, right? He's not a bully, but he is one tough player in the middle of the field. He's tough with the football in his hands. I like the speed, the NFL size, 208 career catches. Love it. So much I like about Khalil Shakir. Matt, what do you think of these other 3 remaining?
Well, you took Khalil Shakir from me, but I got to give you credit because I think you're the only one that has Khalil Shakir ranked higher than me. You had a smidge higher in our individual rankings here. I got to tell you, though, I don't think Alec Pierce belongs in this group. I think Alec Pierce is a better prospect than these other 4 guys that we're talking about here. He has fantastic athleticism for his big man size. He works really well in contested catch situations. He's got great hands. I think he projects as a boundary threat at the next level. And I think he's going to end up being a top 75, if not top 60 NFL draft selection. I'm really bullish on Alec Pierce. I think he's a great value right now. I think he's going to be less of a great value following the NFL draft because I think his capital is going to raise the eyebrow of a few folks. But let's go ahead and jump into our top 10 here. Number 10
can I say one thing?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
The only one who's very high on Alec Pierce. I hear a lot of people have him in the top 10. So you're not alone. It's just our combined rankings. I'm not as high on other people. But I think you might be right. He might go to like like Green Bay in round 2 or 3. So I think, look, landing spot will matter a lot with him.
Yeah, I know. I said I was bullish on him. Maybe I should say I'm bearish on him. All right, moving on. All right, number 10, the forgotten wide receiver, John Mechie out of Alabama. Number 9, Christian Watson, North Dakota State. 8, George Pickens, wide receiver out of Georgia. 7, Skyy Moore, wide receiver out of Western Michigan. And then Jahan Dotson out of Penn State. Now, John, I don't want to personally take credit from us to the Christian Watson hype, but all I'm saying is that in January we called him a sleeper, and he is by no means no longer a sleeper. So folks have caught up. Is that who you want to talk about here, or do you want to go in a different direction?
I was actually going to let you talk this time about Christian Watson. So I was just going to say there's 2 that I really like out of this group. And I've talked about Skyy Moore, so I'll skip him for now. John Mechie is just underrated. I get it. I think his ceiling is capped. I don't think he's necessarily the alpha male. I think he's a Z receiver, and he can play X and on the inside. I think he's versatile. I said this on our preview show. He's a professional. I think you can feel really comfortable with wherever you play John Mechie. He will be a good football player on your team. He will run the correct routes. He will be where he's supposed to be for the quarterback. Is he a 1,300-yard receiver? No. But I'm very comfortable that he's an 850 to 950-yard receiver with 6 to 7 touchdowns. Really like the professionalism and the floor you get with John Mechie. I think he's underrated. Matt, the more this process, some people are coming around because he wasn't getting a lot of conversation. I still love Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, yep.
I know he's a little undersized at 178. I get it. But he's 5'11". And Matt, all I know is the guy makes tremendous plays down the field. Every time I watch him, he's open, he's skying, he's beating people. He isn't, he's athletic, not as athletic as I had hoped. He's not as athletic as Olave. But when I watch the film, Matt, he's awesome. He's just a great receiver. I think he's a tremendous Z. He's too light in the pants for the X. I think he can be a tremendous number 2 receiver. I think he gets first-round draft capital. I really like Jahan Dotson. And at his ADP, if you go running back in the first round, I love getting Jahan Dotson in the second round of a dynasty draft. And let's see where he lands. What if he landed in Kansas City? What do you think of the other 3 there, my friend?
Well, John, before I dig into them, I'll make a quick note here on Jahan Dotson. We have over 20 wide receivers. I'm looking on our consensus rankings here, over 20 to get our consensus ranks, and absolutely 0 of them have the same ranking for us except for Jahan Dotson. We both, and I think what it says is that Jahan Dotson is the best of the rest, right? I think folks have landed on this top tier of wide receivers. I don't even need to say their name. If you're listening to this podcast, you know the 5 other wide receivers that we're going to talk about. You don't know the order yet, unless you're watching on YouTube and you can see. But if you're listening, you don't know the order, but you know the 5 wide receivers, right? But so Jahan Dotson, I think we agree he's the best of the rest, and he could end up really benefiting from that status because he's going to be sitting there when Kansas City is making their selection at the end of the first. Most likely. He's most likely going to be there when Green Bay makes at least their first selection there. So it's going to be really interesting because Jahan Dotson could end up being in a really good offense compared to somebody who could end up going earlier in terms of draft capital, right? So that's really interesting to me. And then, we could do 40 minutes on Skyy Moore. We did a great rookie profile on Skyy Moore. I've gushed about Skyy Moore. I think he's going to be so fantastic. But instead, Pickens and Watson, I think they're really interesting because they're both boundary projection wide receivers, which can be a little bit tricky for fantasy football, right? Because you really need them to project into situations where they're going to get the touchdowns. Even if they, end up with a high reception percentage, they tend to get a little bit less volume, right? Obviously that's, kind of simplifying things to a degree. So for these two guys, landing spot and capital is going to be really, really important. I think folks have maybe over pushed Christian Watson. And so I don't want folks to be disappointed if he doesn't go in the first round. I don't want folks to be disappointed if he ends up being pick 55 and not pick 32. I do think Detroit at the top of the second could be a really fun landing spot for Christian Watson. And George Pickens is going to be one of the most talked about wide receivers through day one or day two of the NFL draft, because we've heard every opinion, I feel like, in this smokescreen week before the NFL draft. We've heard he's a lock first round pick. We've heard he has character issues and he did terrible in interviews and he's going to fall. Who knows? It's going to be a drama of its own watching George Pickens' landing spot. John, there are some folks who have been playing, Devy for years and drafted George Pickens as a freshman player, and they thought they had hit the jackpot, and for a while they had. And now for those folks, it's one of the things that's so fun about playing Devy or Campus to Canton and getting to NFL draft weekend. Some folks have been waiting 4 years to see where George Pickens was going to go. So I think it's going to be a really fun story to watch. Let's go ahead and jump into our consensus top 5. Starting here, John, with Jameson Williams, our consensus number 5 wide receiver. And then number 4 here, we have Drake London out of USC as our consensus number 4 wide receiver. You want to talk Williams or you want to talk London?
I'll talk Drake London. I do like him a lot. I do have him at number 3 overall. I do think he's going to go top 10. I think the Jets are eyeballing him. I think he's the perfect complement to Elijah Moore. I do agree there is some challenges of separation, but that's not how he wins. Drake London wins other ways. He's versatile. You can put him at any position on the field as a wide receiver, and I believe Drake London can be successful. You can't coach size, Matt. 6'4", 219. We discussed it on our preview show. Absolutely love his hands. He might have the best hands in the group. He has incredible body control with his ability to catch the football. I like Drake London a ton. Focus on how he wins, not what he can't do. And Drake London, the ceiling is as a star. He could be a star. And I'll say this, out of our top 5, if you told me any one of these 5 in 3 years are the best receiver in the NFL, I would not be surprised, Matt.
Yeah, you have a great point there. Jameson Williams is going to be a really interesting case study. It's going to be a case study in patience, in dynasty strategy for folks that do decide to take him. I think you're getting a value, right? I think we understand simultaneously that Jameson Williams is ranked too low and that everybody above him is ranked properly, right? It's this weird place to be with Jameson Williams. He's super fast. He has great hands. He's more than just a speedster. He has great route running ability. He really gets through and into his routes well. And he absolutely, burned along the sideline and over the middle of the field. Oftentimes burners, John, only work well along the boundary. Williams works really well over the middle of the field.
Real well.
Yeah, and he, easily, any one of these guys in the top 5 could be the first wide receiver off the board. And Jameson Williams is still rehabbing a torn ACL, and he could be the first wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft. He absolutely could be, right? So here is going to be the exercise in patience. Here is going to be the case study in dynasty strategy. You have to understand that if you are drafting Jameson Williams, you are investing a full rookie year. You do not trade, you do not sell, you do not move Jameson Williams because they are not going to, whatever NFL team he goes to, except maybe the Jaguars, because you can never trust what the Jaguars are going to do, but he won't go there, right? He seems safe from that destiny. Every other NFL team will take the smart route, and they will take their time. They will let Jameson Williams get fully healthy, which means he's probably going to miss most of, if not all of preseason, right? And it takes wide receivers a bit of time to adjust to the NFL. We've gotten spoiled over the last few years with some breakout wide receivers to start, but for most wide receivers, anyways, it takes them time to adjust to the NFL. And so with Jameson Williams coming off of injury, he may not have any impact. He might not see the field for the first half of the NFL season. And then you're going to have to be patient with him. He might not be a superstar coming off of an ACL injury, trying to catch up halfway through a season, right? So understand that you are taking Jameson Williams to be an impact player in 2023, but he could be a star in 2023. So I just want to tell folks, you're getting the discount because you're going to have to wait, but be okay with that. We know that's going to happen. And a year from now, don't forget that and move him on the cheap, right? Because you get excited about next year's guys. No. Hang on to Jameson Williams. All right, John, number 3 in our consensus rankings here is my wide receiver 1, but you tanked his ranking. No, I'm just kidding. You have him down there at 5, and that's that's Chris Olave. You know, when it comes to the wide receiver position, these top 5 guys do fall in the same tiers for me, but there's a stronger concentration with the 3 guys we haven't talked about yet. So you could put, for me, Olave, Burks, and Wilson in any order, and you're going to have a really good argument. For me, Olave is the most well-rounded wide receiver. I think he's an excellent pass catcher. I think he's an excellent athlete. He's got the speed. He plays well over the middle of the field. I think he's really versatile in the way that he can play. And so it's going to come down to landing spot and what I can project for volume. Whichever one of these wide receivers that I can project volume for is going to end up being the guy that I go with here. So I really like Chris Olave. I don't knock folks that don't have him high up. And quite frankly, you know, I'm fine if I'm the only one with Chris Olave as wide receiver 1 because I love my wide receiver values, and I swear I find them every year. I'd be happy for Chris Olave to be that guy for me this year. But, John, I'll let you go ahead and talk about our consensus wide receiver 2 here, and that is Treylon Burks out of Arkansas.
I still like Burks, and I understand. I think he has the widest outcome. Like if you put it on a spectrum, he has a very low floor. He could be Jonathan Baldwin coming out of Pittsburgh, landing in Kansas City, or he could be DK Metcalf, landing in Seattle. Wide range of outcomes. And I understand all of the different opinions on Treylon Burks. When I look at receiving yards per team pass attempt, it's a pretty sticky number when you look at it for fantasy football success. At the end of the day, Treylon Burks was 3.51. The only other player, we have Skyy Moore 3.51 and Wendell Robinson 3.64. Those are the 3 highest at that statistic. Treylon Burks, 41% team aerial dominator, 72% catch rate. And Matt, we joked about this on the preview show of Burks. Name an Arkansas quarterback. Most people can't. 72% catch rate. Now, I understand they threw a lot of quick screens, a lot of short dump offs. I get that. But I'm 6'2", 225 with room to grow. His athleticism is not what I hoped, but that's not how he wins. I just hope that a team brings him in and the coach uses him where he can be efficient with his size. Put him in motion, play him at the Z, put him on the inside. If you just stick him at the X and think he's going to be a classic X receiver, Matt, you're going to ruin this young man's career. He is not going to succeed sitting at the X and running 3 patterns from the X. It's just not going to work. What they need to do is use them correctly. So landing spot will matter, but I also have them ranked on ceiling. I see the ceiling, but I am very aware that there's a lot of risk with Treylon Burks.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. You correctly pointed out that Treylon Burks, truly out of this top tier, has the widest range of outcomes. And I almost feel like our consensus wide receiver one here is the opposite. He almost feels like he has a much narrower range of outcome, which to me, he's going to be sitting there in his career, a back-end wide receiver one, a high-end wide receiver two, right? Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State just feels like a guy. And I've said this with my NFL mock draft projections. It's like, dude, you could put Garrett Wilson in 95% of NFL offenses, and you're like, yeah, good fit. You know what I mean? Like, he's such a well-rounded, high-floor type wide receiver. And I know sometimes, and I'm somebody who sits here and says ceiling, ceiling, ceiling with fantasy football. But, when you're sitting there looking at Garrett Wilson, he's likely going to capture high draft capital. I think we're going to be, very happy with Garrett Wilson over the next few years. And, that's my observation, from a fantasy perspective. But this is your wide receiver one, John. So I am not going to take your spotlight and talk about him in depth.
It was great. I love the show Path to the Draft and NFL Live. I come home from work, the wife is cooking or I'm cooking something and I'm getting ready and I have it on TV. Well, today they had an interview with Garrett Wilson. Man, I was really impressed with this young man. He is a very put together, impressive speaker. So I like that. But, they were showing highlights of him, Matt. And you know what I saw? Those are the clips. In every highlight, it was on ESPN, I should say. Every highlight was him 5 yards open, 25 yards down the field. That's exactly what I saw. And here's ESPN with like 5 clips. And there were 2 of them where there was no defensive back in the screen. Yeah. Now, part of it's Ohio State. But if you watch the film, he's also just literally beating people with his route running and second level separation. I love him. I've said it. I think he's Stephon Diggs and Jerry Jeudy. I agree with you. Very limited outcome. He's going to be 1,000-yard to 1,200-yard receiver, 7 to 10 or 11 touchdowns every year. Just no question in my mind he gets open at the NFL level, and a very impressive young man in the interview. He's my number one. I would love to get him if I have the 3rd or 4th pick in the draft.
There we are. Our top 20 consensus wide receivers, our top 10 consensus tight ends. John, the end of a long pre-draft road for us officially started back in January, but it never really stops for us. And so in some ways, an extension of back to last summer. Gearing up here, our final pre-draft episode, getting ready for a wild, wild NFL draft weekend. I got to tell you, it is an absolute pleasure each and every time I get to get on the mic with you, John. And I know our listeners feel the same way. And so it's a little bittersweet to wrap this up here. But, personally, I appreciate everybody who has been listening, watching along the way. So many comments, especially on our YouTube, so many reviews flowing in on the podcast channels. We appreciate everybody who's engaged with us. So thank you all so much, and plenty of post-draft coverage coming your way as well. As always, we appreciate you checking out. I didn't want it to end.
I didn't know. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt.